So here's the thing, nobody tells you about finding out you've been betrayed. It's not the screaming. It's not the confrontation. It's not even the divorce papers. It's the moment you realize you were never actually married to a person. You were married to a project. And that project had a deadline. My name is Sarah. 3 years ago, I installed a hidden camera in my garage because I thought my husband Mark was cheating. I was wrong. He wasn't having an affair. He was negotiating my disappearance. And the woman pulling his strings? She offered me a job when I confronted her. Part 1. The smell. 0:45 to 4:30. I need to start with the smell. Because that's where it actually began, even though I didn't understand what I was smelling until it was too late. Mark and I had been together for 8 years, married for 6. He was a financial analyst, or that's what he told me. Normal job, normal hours, normal life in suburban Denver. We had the house, the routine, the whole performance. But that Tuesday in October, he came home smelling wrong. Not wrong like sweat or gym or even another woman's perfume. Wrong like intention. Like he'd put on a scent that belonged to a life I wasn't invited into. Tom Ford, Oud Wood, $250 a bottle. We didn't spend $250 on groceries some weeks. I noticed it immediately. He kissed my cheek and I froze. Because my husband smelled like a stranger's ambition. I said nothing. I told myself, work event, sample from a colleague, maybe he finally bought himself something nice. My brain generated excuses faster than I could process the alarm bells. That's what you do when the alternative is recognizing that your entire life is built on performance art. But here's the pattern I missed. The pattern I'm going to repeat because you need to understand how slow this was, how gradual. The smell came back, different days, different intensities, sometimes faint, like he'd tried to wash it off. Sometimes fresh, like he'd just applied it in the parking garage before walking through our door. I started cataloging it like a lunatic. Tuesday, strong. Thursday, faint. Saturday, none. Sunday, strong again. I wasn't tracking an affair. I was tracking schedules. I just didn't know that's what I was doing. And Mark started performing harder, more attentive, more present, more deliberate. He'd ask about my day with this intensity that felt like he was studying for a test. He'd bring home flowers on Wednesdays, never Fridays, always Wednesdays. He'd initiate conversations about our future, our plans, our security. Every gesture that looked like love was actually maintenance. I felt it in my bones before I understood it in my brain. Something was being preserved. Something was being kept functional. I didn't check his phone. I didn't follow him. I didn't do any of the things you're supposed to do when you suspect betrayal, because I wasn't sure I wanted to know, because knowing meant becoming someone who knew, and I wasn't ready to be her yet. So I waited. I collected the smell like evidence I wasn't ready to examine. I let the tension build until it became its own kind of normal. And then, 2 weeks after the first Tom Ford Tuesday, Mark made a mistake. He left his laptop open on the kitchen counter. Screen unlocked. Notification visible. I wasn't snooping. I was making coffee. The screen was just there, facing me, demanding to be seen. One word, one message. One open browser tab with a messaging app I didn't recognize. Not WhatsApp, not Signal. Something custom, something designed. The word was soon. No context, no name. Just soon. With a period. Final. Certain. Like a countdown I wasn't aware was happening. I stood there with the coffee pot in my hand, staring at that word until it stopped looking like language and started looking like a threat. Because soon implies an event. Soon implies planning. Soon implies that someone, somewhere, is waiting for something to happen. And I wasn't part of that waiting. I didn't scroll. I didn't click. I didn't take a photo with my phone. I just memorized it, burned it into my brain. Soon, the period, the timestamp, 2:47 p.m., the app icon, a gray square with no label. Then I heard the shower turn off. I moved the coffee pot. I became a woman who hadn't seen anything. And Mark walked in, towel around his waist, smelling like his old soap, his real smell, the one I knew, and kissed me good morning like soon, wasn't sitting on the screen between us. That was the first time I understood I was playing a game without knowing the rules. That was the first time I felt the distance between what I was seeing and what I was allowed to acknowledge. Here's where I need to tell you about the repetition, because this is crucial. This is the pattern that broke me and rebuilt me. Over the next 3 weeks, I saw that word 4 more times. Not because I was searching, because Mark got careless, because soon became frequent enough that he stopped hiding it as carefully. Soon. In a notification while he was cooking dinner. Soon. On his lock screen while he thought I was asleep. Soon. In an email subject line that he closed too quickly when I walked into his home office. Each time I said nothing. Each time I became better at pretending not to see. Each time the gap between his performance and my knowledge grew wider, and I started to feel like I was disappearing into that gap. Like Sarah was becoming a role I played for an audience of one, and the real me was shrinking into something small and silent and observant. I bought the camera on a Thursday. $80 on Amazon, overnight shipping. A tiny black cube, motion-activated, Wi-Fi enabled, invisible in shadow. I didn't put it in the house. Mark was too careful in the house, too conscious. Every movement there was calculated, every gesture designed to maintain the performance. I needed somewhere he felt safe, somewhere he let his guard down. The garage. Our detached garage where he worked on projects that never got finished, where he made phone calls I couldn't hear, where he went when he needed to clear his head. I installed it inside an old paint can on the workbench. Lens facing the center of the room. Battery life, 72 hours. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself this was the moment I crossed into crazy wife territory, the territory of women I used to judge on Reddit threads and true crime podcasts. I told myself all of this while knowing, absolutely knowing, that soon meant something I wasn't going to like. The first 2 days of footage were nothing. Mark entering, Mark leaving, Mark staring at his phone, Mark pacing. The pacing was interesting, back and forth, like he was waiting for a call he couldn't make in the house. Day 3, Saturday afternoon. Mark entered at 2:15 p.m. He closed the garage door manually. Unusual. He walked to the workbench. He reached behind the old toolbox and retrieved something I had never seen before. A second phone. Not a work phone, not a backup. A secret phone. Black, slim, anonymous. He powered it on with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times, and then he made a call. I watched this live on my laptop sitting in our bedroom 3 feet from where his real phone sat charging on the nightstand. The audio was surprisingly clear. I heard every word. And here's where I need to be precise, because this is where the story stops being about infidelity and starts being about something else entirely. Mark said, "She doesn't suspect anything." He said, "I need 2 more weeks for the transfer to clear." He said, "Evelyn wants everything documented before we move." Evelyn. A name. A woman's name. The affair, right? The other woman. The explanation I had been preparing myself for since the Tom Ford Tuesdays began. But then he said, "Tell her the asset is stable. No volatility. She'll hold until we need her." Asset. Volatility. Hold until we need her. These were not words people used about wives. These were words people used about investments, about property, about things that existed to be leveraged. I watched the entire call, 12 minutes. Mark spoke with a confidence I had never heard in our marriage, a certainty, a professionalism. When he hung up, he wiped the phone with a cloth, powered it down, returned it to its hiding place, and left the garage looking exactly like the man who had entered it. Except I had seen him, the real him, the operator, the asset manager, the person who spoke about his wife like she was a line item in a spreadsheet. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat on our bed and watched the footage again, and again, and again. I watched until I could recite every word, until Asset stopped hurting and started clarifying. Because here's what I understood in that repetition, in that obsessive review. Mark wasn't cheating on me in the traditional sense. He was using me. He had been using me for years, and whatever soon meant, it wasn't a romantic getaway. It was a liquidation. I started with the finances that night, not because I planned to, because I couldn't stop myself, because asset meant money, and money meant records, and records meant evidence. We had joint accounts. We had transparency. We had the modern marriage performance of shared passwords and monthly budget reviews. I had never looked closely because I had never needed to, because trust meant not looking. I looked. The pattern was immediate, obvious, embarrassing in its visibility once I actually saw it. Small transfers, regular, steady, $200 here, $500 there, always labeled utilities, repairs, miscellaneous. Over 3 years, these miscellaneous expenses totaled $47,000. $47,000 gone. Not to another woman, not to gambling or drugs or any of the usual stories. Just relocated. Moved through accounts I didn't recognize, ending in entities with names like EKG Holdings and Grant Management LLC. I searched these names. I found nothing obvious, no websites, no public records, just shell company breadcrumbs leading to other shells. But Grant, Evelyn Grant, the name from Mark's phone call, connected to the money, connected to the asset. I confronted Mark that weekend. Not with everything. I wasn't ready for everything. I asked about one transfer. One $800 withdrawal from our savings, 6 months prior, labeled emergency home repair. His response was perfect. Too perfect. Immediate explanation, documentation produced from his filing cabinet, a contractor's invoice I had never seen for work I didn't remember authorizing. He wasn't defensive. He was prepared. He had been waiting for this question. He had a file for this question. That was the moment I understood the depth of it. This wasn't a secret Mark was hiding. This was a system Mark was maintaining. He had infrastructure. He had protocols. He had contingency plans for his wife's curiosity. I apologized. I said I was stressed, anxious, probably overreacting. I performed the role of the paranoid wife who needed reassurance, and he performed the role of the patient husband who provided it. We completed the scene together, both of us knowing it was theater, neither of us acknowledging the audience. But here's the crucial repetition, the pattern that saved me. Mark's perfection became his tell. Every time he was too ready, too smooth, too helpful, I knew I had touched something real. I started testing it. Small questions about money, about time, about his work trips. Each time, the performance was flawless. Each time, I mapped another coordinate in the architecture of his deception. I stopped sleeping. I started waking at 3 a.m. with my heart pounding, my mind racing through possibilities. Not affair possibilities. Something darker. Something that explained asset and volatility and hold until we need her. I needed help. I needed someone who could see what I couldn't, access what I couldn't reach, and I found him in the most ordinary way possible. Derek, from college, who posted on Facebook about his new cybersecurity job and his willingness to help friends with computer stuff. I messaged him. I think my husband is hiding something. Can you help me find it? Derek came over the next evening. Mark was at one of his late meetings. I showed him the laptop, the accounts, the footage from the garage camera. I told him everything except my real fear, the fear that I wasn't just being deceived, I was being processed. Derek worked for 6 hours. Recovery software, deleted file reconstruction, browser history analysis. He didn't find love letters. He didn't find hotel receipts. He found contracts.pdf files. Encrypted, deleted, but recoverable. Legal documents with my name on them. My signature, forged my signature, on loan applications, property transfers, investment authorizations. Documents that gave Evelyn Grant, and entities she controlled, power of attorney over my financial decisions. Documents that made me a guarantor for debts I didn't know existed. Derek read them with growing confusion, then growing horror. Sarah, these are serious. This is identity fraud. This is financial exploitation. You need to call the police. But I was looking at something else. A different document buried in the same folder. Not a contract. A profile. My profile. My name. My birth date. My social security number. My medical history. My depression diagnosis from 5 years ago. my anxiety medication, my therapy records, my employment history, my family connections, a complete inventory of Sarah Mitchell, human being, reduced to data points and risk assessments. At the bottom, a single line. Psychological profile suggests high compliance, low confrontation tendency, asset suitable for extended holding pattern. I wasn't Mark's wife. I was Mark's assignment. And someone, Evelyn Grant, had paid him to cultivate me, to document me, to prepare me for something I still didn't understand. Derek wanted to go to the authorities immediately. I stopped him, because I had seen enough true crime to know how this worked. The police would see a wife with forged signatures and assume I was complicit until proven otherwise. They would see financial transfers and assume marital dispute. They would see Mark's perfect documentation and see a responsible husband dealing with a paranoid spouse. I needed to understand the game before I could end it. I needed to meet Evelyn Grant. I found her address in Mark's recovered files. Not a home, an office. Downtown Denver, 14th floor of a building with no signage, no directory, no obvious purpose. I went there on a Tuesday, Tom Ford Tuesday. The symmetry felt appropriate. The elevator required keycard access. I didn't have one. I waited in the lobby for 3 hours, watching, until I saw her. Evelyn Grant, 50s, severe gray suit, the kind of woman who looked like she calculated the exact cost of everything she saw. I followed her to a coffee shop. I sat across from her. I said, "I'm Sarah Mitchell. I think you've been expecting me." She didn't flinch, didn't blink, just looked at me with an evaluation I recognized immediately. It was the same look Mark gave me when he was determining which version of himself to deploy. "You're early," she said. "Mark indicated you were still in the holding pattern. Holding pattern. Asset. The language of management, not relationship. I asked her what she had paid my husband to do to me. I asked her how long this had been happening. I asked her what soon meant. Evelyn smiled. Not cruel, not kind. Just efficient. Your husband has been on my payroll for 4 years, Sarah. You're not his first project. You won't be his last. But you are, potentially, his most valuable. Your psychological profile." "I read it," I interrupted. "Then you understand. You're not a victim of passion. You're a participant in a structure. Mark was tasked with cultivating compliant assets, individuals with specific psychological profiles, specific financial situations, specific vulnerabilities. You're premium stock, Sarah. High value, low maintenance, excellent collateral." I should have felt rage. I should have felt horror. Instead, I felt something unexpected. Clarity. The fear disappeared. The confusion disappeared. I was looking at a system, and systems could be understood. Systems could be gamed. "I want in," I said. Evelyn's expression changed. For the first time, something like interest. "Excuse me?" "You said I'm valuable. You said I'm premium stock. If I'm that good at being an asset, imagine how good I'd be at being a partner. I know Mark's methods. I know his documentation. I know how he thinks. I can give you insight you don't have. I can give you access." I was bluffing. I was desperate. I was performing the only role available to me in that moment, the role of someone who saw opportunity in destruction. Evelyn studied me for 30 seconds. Then she opened her briefcase and removed a tablet. "There's a test," she said. "If you pass, we discuss terms. If you fail, you disappear. Not metaphorically. Actually. We have resources for that." I took the tablet. I started the test. I don't remember most of the questions. They were psychological assessments, scenario responses, ethical dilemmas designed to measure something I didn't understand. I answered them as myself because I had no other self to offer. 3 hours later, Evelyn received a notification. She looked at me differently. "You passed," she said. "Higher scores than Mark. He'll be disappointed." I had 2 weeks to prepare. Evelyn gave me that, time to document, to plan, to become someone who could face Mark with the truth instead of collapsing beneath it. She also gave me money. An advance, she called it. Operational funds. I used it to hire a lawyer, not for divorce, not yet, but for protection. I used it to move our children to my sister's house, explaining nothing, explaining everything with my silence. I used it to buy time and space and options. Mark noticed the changes. He noticed my distance, my calm, my refusal to engage with his performance. He tried harder, more attention, more gifts, more of the careful maintenance that had defined our marriage. I let him try. I collected his efforts like evidence. The night of the confrontation, I prepared the house like a stage. Documents on the dining table, every contract, every forged signature, every financial transfer. The garage camera footage cued on the TV. Evelyn's business card placed precisely where he would see it last. Mark came home at 7 p.m. He smelled like Tom Ford. He smiled like nothing had changed. He asked about my day with that intensity that used to feel like love and now felt like data collection. "We need to talk," I said. I led him to the dining room. I watched him see the documents, the footage, the card. I watched his performance falter, not dramatically, just adjusting, recalculating, determining which version of himself to deploy in this new scenario. "Sarah, I can explain." "Don't," I said. "I've spent 4 years watching you explain. 4 years watching you perform. I don't want explanations. I want acknowledgement. I want you to say, out loud, what I was to you." He couldn't do it. Even now, even with everything exposed, he reached for the familiar tools: minimization, redirection, emotional appeal. "I love you." "I've always loved you. This was complicated. This was work. This was never about us." "Asset," I said. "Volatility, holding pattern. Tell me those words were never about us." He went pale, actually pale. The first genuine reaction I had seen from him in years. "You spoke to Evelyn." "I did more than speak to her. I'm working with her now. Did you know your psychological assessments go both ways? Did you know she tests her cultivators too? You scored high on compliance, Mark, low on independence. She always knew you'd follow the script." This was partially true. Evelyn had told me about Mark's profile, his limitations, his predictability. I was using it as weapon and shield, hurting him with information, protecting myself with the implication that I had already moved beyond his reach. Mark collapsed. Not physically. He didn't fall to his knees or weep dramatically. He just deflated. The performance energy drained out of him, leaving something small and scared and finally real. "What happens now?" he asked. I gave him the terms I had prepared. Total separation. No contact. No explanation to friends or family. Just disappearance. The same disappearance he had planned for me, but voluntary. He would leave Colorado. He would surrender all claims to property, to children, to the identity he had constructed. In exchange, I wouldn't go to the police. I wouldn't expose the system. I would let him become someone else, somewhere else, the same transformation he had intended for me. He agreed. Of course he agreed. Mark was always good at following scripts, and I had written this one. But here's the repetition that matters, the pattern that defines what came after. I didn't feel victory. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt the same emptiness I had felt in the garage, watching him on the camera. The recognition that I had never known this person, and that the person I thought I knew had never existed. That was 3 years ago. I live in Portland now. Different name, not legally changed, just different. Sarah Mitchell exists in documents, in records, in the official history. The person typing this is someone else. Someone harder to trace, harder to profile, harder to cultivate. Evelyn and I worked together for 18 months. I won't tell you what we did. I won't incriminate myself, and I won't romanticize it. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't justice. It was survival in a system I finally understood. I learned how people become assets. I learned how to identify the markers, the compliance, the hope, the need to believe that attention equals love. I used that knowledge. I helped Evelyn identify new prospects. I helped her refine the psychological assessments. I became, for a while, exactly what Mark had been: a cultivator, a performer, someone who could make people feel seen while seeing them as inventory. I'm not proud of this, but I'm not ashamed either. Because here's the truth about betrayal that nobody tells you. It doesn't just break your trust in others, it breaks your trust in yourself, your judgment, your perception, your fundamental sense of what is real. I spent 18 months in that broken place, using the same tools that had been used against me. And then I stopped, because I realized I was becoming the system instead of surviving it. Because Evelyn offered me a permanent position, a partnership, a lifetime of identifying and processing assets, and I looked at her and saw my future, efficient, wealthy, and completely empty. I took the money I had earned, more than Mark had stolen, more than enough, and I disappeared. Again. From Evelyn, from the system, from everything I had learned to navigate. I started over in Portland with a new name, a small apartment, and the constant awareness that I was now the kind of person who knew how to disappear. I think about Mark sometimes, not with longing, not even with anger anymore, just recognition. I recognize what he was, a tool in a structure that existed before him and continues after him. I recognize what I was, premium stock, high compliance, low confrontation. I recognize what I became, someone who learned to use the system instead of being used by it. The children are fine. They're with my sister officially, though they're old enough now to understand more than I tell them. They know their father travels for work. They know their mother needed a fresh start. They don't know about the Tom Ford Tuesdays, the garage camera, the contracts with forged signatures. They don't know that their existence was part of my psychological profile, a factor in my asset valuation. Sometimes I wonder if I'm still being tracked. If Evelyn keeps tabs on former employees the way she keeps tabs on former assets. Sometimes I see gray sedans parked too long on my street, or notice the same person in coffee shops, and I can't tell if it's paranoia or pattern recognition. I've learned that the two are often indistinguishable. I date now, cautiously, with full disclosure of my caution. I tell potential partners early. I was married to a fraud for 8 years. I participated in a criminal enterprise for 18 months. I am not a reliable narrator of my own history, and I am always watching for the moment when attention becomes assessment. Most people leave after that conversation. A few stay. None have stayed long enough to test whether I've actually changed, whether I can trust without verification, whether I can love without inventory. Maybe I can't. Maybe the Tom Ford Tuesdays broke something that doesn't repair. Or maybe I'm still in process, still becoming whoever I'm going to be after all of this. I don't know. I don't trust my own judgment enough to claim certainty. Here's why I'm telling you this. Not for sympathy, not for advice. I'm telling you because I want you to understand the repetition, the pattern, the thing that saved me and might save you. Betrayal isn't always obvious. It doesn't always look like lipstick on collars or late nights at the office. Sometimes it looks like perfect attentiveness. Sometimes it looks like someone who always has the right answer, the perfect explanation, the documentation that proves their innocence. Sometimes it smells like Tom Ford wood on a Tuesday, and your brain generates excuses because the alternative is recognizing that you're living in a performance. If you're watching this and recognizing something, if you're seeing the patterns in your own life, the too perfect responses, the unexplained absences, the gradual erosion of your certainty about what's real, I want you to know that you're not crazy. You're being managed, and management feels like care until you try to leave. I got out, not because I was smart or strong or special. I got out because I stopped trusting my own desire to believe. I started documenting instead of dismissing. I started watching instead of wishing. And eventually, I started playing the game instead of being played by it. That last part, the playing, I don't recommend it. It costs something you don't get back. But the documenting, the watching, the refusal to dismiss your own unease, that's survival. That's how you become someone who can tell this story instead of disappearing into it. Mark is somewhere. Maybe still working for Evelyn, maybe not. Maybe he found another asset, another Sarah, another person who smells the Tom Ford and tells themselves it's a sample from a colleague. I can't save her. I can only hope she finds the camera, or the contracts, or the courage to stop believing before soon becomes now. I'm Sarah. Or I was. Or I'm someone else now. The name doesn't matter. What matters is the pattern. What matters is seeing it. What matters is knowing that the performance isn't love. The maintenance isn't care, and the gap between what you see and what you're allowed to acknowledge is where you start to disappear. Don't disappear. Document. Watch. Ask the question even when you don't want the answer, because the only thing worse than finding out you've been betrayed is never knowing you were living in a story someone else was writing. That's it. That's all I have. If you recognize yourself in this, get help. Not from friends who will tell you you're paranoid, not from family who want to believe the best, from professionals who understand financial exploitation, identity fraud, coercive control, from people who know that sometimes the most dangerous thing in your life is the person who never raises their voice. Stay safe, stay suspicious, and trust the smell, even when you don't want to.